In this part of our RPG series, we're going to give our player a health system. So taking damage finally means something. Let's start by creating a new script called PlayerHealth. This script will handle how much health the player has, how to take damage, and what happens when that health hits zero. Later, we'll connect it to our enemy attacks and even add a death animation and game over logic. For now, let's jump into the code and build the foundation of our health system. Let's start by creating a public class called PlayerHealth, which inherits from mono behavior, so we can attach it to our player game object. We define a max health value that represents the player's full HP and a private variable to keep track of the current health. Inside start method, we initialize the player's health. Now we write a public method called take damage. This will reduce the player's current health by the amount passed in and log it to the console. If we have an animator, we trigger a hurt animation. This is optional, but adds a lot of polish to your game. Then we check if health has dropped to 0 or below. If so, we call a method called die. Inside the die function, we log that the player has died and trigger the die animation if we have one. We then disable the player movement script to stop the player from moving, and finally disable the health script itself to prevent any more updates. And that's it. We now have a working player health system ready to be connected to enemy attacks. Let's now update our enemy attack script so the enemy can actually damage the player during an attack. First, we add a private player health variable to hold a reference to the player's health system. Inside the start method, we grab the player health component from the player game object. Next, we move into the update method. We now make sure the player and player health references are both valid before running any logic. If the player is in attack range and the enemy is not on cooldown, we calculate the direction, set the animation, freeze the enemy, and most importantly, we call take damage method on the player to apply actual damage. This makes our combat finally meaningful. We reset the cooldown, and when out of range or cooling down, we reset the animation and free the rigid body constraints to allow movement again. Now that we've finished scripting our player's health system, let's switch back to Unity and apply the script to our player game object. First, click on the player in the hierarchy. Then, in the inspector panel, click Add Component and search for player health.